I had a fairly happy childhood. We had a lot of fun times with family during holidays. I came from a big family, and so there was always lots of cousins and aunts and uncles around, and I really enjoyed that. I played a lot of sports, basketball, football, baseball were my big three, and loved that. I had parents who, while they were good and loving, decent people, had their own stuff that they were working on. And so as a result, some of their stuff landed on me. My dad had his own problem with lust, and I think it was his porn magazines that I found at a young age, maybe around 9 years old or so. My mom had a problem with anger, and as a result, there was a lot of physical abuse going on as well. And so today, those things are really healed with my parents, but they did have an effect on me growing up, to the point where when I was introduced to pornography, it was like a daily thing, and I would go back to this day in, day out. And I actually remember seeing the people in the porn pictures and remembering looking at them and thinking, wow, I wish I could be one of those people. And I remember just looking at them thinking, they seem so free and like they're having so much fun. And so I didn't know it was called this at the time, but I actually wanted to be a porn star growing up. And so thank goodness that wasn't one of the options that the high school guidance counselors offered. So I was involved with that on a regular daily basis. And I remember growing up in the Pacific Northwest, there was a lot of moisture in the air, and so the pages had mold on them, and I kept these things for years and years. It was about that time that I started to act out some of those things that I saw in the pornography with kids in the neighborhood almost on a daily basis, from about the time of 9 years old to right around 15 or so, and got involved in seeing videos and things like that, but had a paper out, and so would act out with people around the neighborhood, etc. Because previously I was also involved in some sexual abuse. I had a female babysitter that took advantage, and a male scout leader as well. So that really messed with my trust for adults, and didn't really understand what sex was about, because it was confusing. You had the feelings of excitement and pleasure mixed with feelings of fear, shame, or guilt mixed in there. And that was a bad, traumatic combination that left me acting stuff out from there on out. The thing with the female babysitter happened, and then I believe it was later, around 10 years old, when I had the incident with the male scout leader, both of whom I trusted and looked up to a lot. And again, these things seemed exciting at the time because they were so new, but really it caused a scarring effect on me, and it damaged who I saw myself as a person and as a sexual being, and it damaged the way I saw sex and viewed that as well. In terms of what I was thinking when those things were happening, I definitely remember with the female babysitter, the things she was having me do, it just felt so new and exciting. And I also felt like there was some sort of affirmation. Of course, it would be false affirmation that, I must be pretty cool if an older girl is letting me do these things to her. The difference with the male scout leader was that I did not want to do the things that he was asking me to do, and so I felt very afraid. And I remember actually, I must have just blacked out or something, because I remember telling myself something to the effect of, if I just ignore whatever he's doing, then and not think about it and just go to sleep, then I won't be bothered by it. And so I think what I did was either just blacked out or sort of dissociated from myself at that moment. At first I didn't tell at all. In terms of the female babysitter, I didn't really see a point in telling it. It was sort of couched as a secret thing, I think, and I was very young. So probably being a boy, and boys can compartmentalize just as well as men, I didn't make a connection there. When it came to the scout leader, I did eventually tell, and my parents' reaction to that was so overwhelming to me and so scary and so humiliating that if anything ever happened beyond that, I would never have told a thing. They really overreacted, and that was hard for me because what I really needed to hear was, hey, you know what? This happens to a lot of kids. This wasn't your fault. You didn't do anything. He was an adult. He should have been protecting you, not abusing you. And he was wrong for doing those things, and he really needs to be accountable for those things. And we're going to make sure that he gets held accountable and that you're going to be safe. Those are the things I really needed to hear. The reason why masturbation started so early for me, and I think that would have been around 8 or 9 years old or so, was a combination of a couple things. First of all, I was exposed to some early childhood sex play by some other kids in our neighborhood. And I did have a lot of anxiety as a kid. And then coupled with the fact that I was seeing pornography on a regular basis, it was just something that I think nobody showed me per se, but I just explored and through self-discovery started on my own on a regular basis. And so I think that's how it happened for me. And then of course it just progressed from there. I was a late bloomer. 7th, 8th grade, we had to take showers every single day in junior high. And that was extremely embarrassing because all the other kids started to grow and mature and I didn't. And so as a result, I was jealous of them. I thought I was inadequate, inferior. I was also shorter. All those things mixed in there bred these terrible insecurities and jealousies of other guys. And so, I thought of myself as less than, and it still wants to creep into my thinking today. There's several times where I catch myself thinking something that's different than the way God thinks about me. I think the other thing was I came from a mixed-raced family. Not a lot of people even believe me when I tell them, but I'm a quarter Mexican, and that's my predominant racial affiliation. I grew up going to my grandmother's every Christmas and on holidays, and she's 100% Mexican. All my family, they all look Mexican. I'm the only one that got the white-looking genes, if I may. And so as a result, I thought that I was less than as well because of that association and being part of a minority group that didn't get treated as well all the time. And there was other factors in my family where one side looked down on the other, and so there was a lot of reasons for self-hatred there. I definitely got messages from peers. I remember not just peers, but adults. In 6th grade, everybody called me Gay Jay. I think, kids can be so cruel at that age anyways, but that was my nickname, and, everything else came along with it. Fairy, use your imagination, Tinkerbell, and that was extremely painful because, every kid in 6th grade just wants to be liked and accepted. And then I remember in 7th grade, we were sitting in the locker room, and the PE coach was talking to us in the boys' locker room, and I think I was talking to a friend or something, and he asked me something, and I said, "What?" And he said, "That's what I thought, you faggot," in front of all the other boys. And that was terribly embarrassing and humiliating and degrading. It was even more painful when I told my parents, and they brought me to the principal, and the principal, being a friend of this guy's, didn't believe that he would say such a thing. And so that was pretty hard. It really was about that time that I started to know of the Lord. Thankfully, right at about 7th or 8th grade, some friends started inviting me to their Assemblies of God youth group. And I'm so thankful to this day to my pastors back then, Billy Wolf and Alan Fox. How do you like that? A wolf and a fox. And they, took me under their wing. They took me to, I remember going to a Dave Reaver conference and getting saved. I got saved a lot of times in the Assemblies of God because you can get saved more than once there. And so, it was a lot of fun, and we did fun things, went to camp. And wow, God really just showed me that, here's a community of people that are going to love you, and they're going to care about you. But I wasn't ready, I think, to turn it all over to Him at those early ages of junior high and even high school. But that's where I got my first taste of Christianity and understanding who God was, even though I wasn't really willing to let Him know me per se. Surprisingly, after I got rid of the porn magazines for whatever reason, I didn't have a lot of exposure to pornography through my later teen years. It wasn't until I was out of high school and maybe about 18, 19 years old that I ran into some homosexual porn videos that I actually got involved again with pornography. And that was only just a short time because I got saved at 21 and I didn't have any problem with pornography for almost a decade after I got saved. The progression of the homosexual confusion or the unwanted same-gender attractions for me started at an early age with a lot of experimentation with other boys and of course, stemming from the molestation that I underwent with the scout leader, not feeling very close to my dad because we were so different. And then, going through junior high and feeling so insecure because I was a late bloomer, all those things, masturbation and the images that I had in my head of other boys and other men, neurologically, psychologically, trauma-based, mood disordered, relationally, every way you could think of it, I was struggling with those developing same-gender attractions that seemed so real because there was a valid need behind them. I did need male affirmation. I did need closeness with other boys and other men. I did need closeness with my dad. I didn't need some of the other things there that were involved. And so for me, the progression really started to take off in high school when I started just noticing other boys and wanting to act on that, but never really having the courage or the guts, and probably knowing better not to. And it wasn't until I was in my early college years that I was exposed to some homosexual pornographic videos and found some gay friends to be involved with, and started hitting the club scene and the dance club scene pretty hard. That I really started to take some risks and chances to step out on those homosexual feelings. And thankfully for me, I never went what you would call into the lifestyle per se. I had some limited encounters, but for me, the development of that was really strongly up here, in my head, the thoughts and the feelings. Those went all through my 20s. After I got saved at 21, they still hung on because the masturbation hung on. And even though I wasn't looking at pornography anymore, the mental images were enough to keep those unwanted same-gender attractions alive. And then when I went to tell my church about it, that's when I really felt the rejection because they weren't prepared to handle it. We went through about 9 months earlier a real traumatic thing as a body where our pastor of 25 years, the only head pastor we'd ever had, was eventually stepped down because of being in the news every night and being accused of sexual indiscretions with younger men. So here I am confessing as an intern that, I struggle with same-gender attractions. I haven't acted on them or anything like that, but I just want to put this in the light and let you people know. And them saying, well, that's I think the word he used was an abomination or something like that, or an impurity. And, them basically letting me go. And all because I wanted to just put my life in the light. That was extremely painful, needless to say. But God really encouraged me that he was going to use this. And, redemptively, he has. I mean, I can tell people in the church that, hey, you know what? I know what it's like to be rejected. I know what it's like to be thrown out just because of a struggle, not even a sin issue. And but I'm still coming back, and I'm still serving the Lord, and so can you. So that's part of the redemptive vision story that God has made real in my life. Your passion beats for Christ alone. Through my 20s, I didn't have any involvement with other people or pornography or anything. It was just the masturbation and the thought life that I struggled with. And so when I started going to graduate school, out of nowhere, the pornography hit me. And so this is, I was about 29 at the time, and I started sporadically binging on pornography. And this is after I had been sort of rejected by my church. And so for me, it went from that sporadic binging to, starting to see people at the club and having urges to reach out to them there. It was about that time that, I met my wife-to-be, and when we got married, I was sure to share with her everything that I struggled with, which she handled beautifully, and had to kind of work through that. But I wanted to make sure that if we were going to get engaged, that she knew everything. Well, we got married, And I never thought that getting married would solve the problem, but I kind of thought it would help, and it did for a while, about 60 days. Then the pornography and the masturbation returned, and it was about that time that a man came to our church and talked about being free from these things and sexual integrity, and I thought, wow, I really want that. So I started getting involved and started looking at the issue. But in my pride and arrogance, I wouldn't get involved in like an actual group or an actual recovery program. I kind of was saying, well, I'm a therapist, and so, certainly other people's problems are worse than mine, or certainly I'm better equipped to handle and deal with this on my own. So I was living in this self-deception. Well, I was white-knuckling it for about 7 months and didn't act out for, the longest period of my life. Troubled times came again, and I started going back to the binging. It's about 4 or 5 months of that, and my wife one day asked me, because when was the last time you acted out? Well, up until this time, I had always confessed to her if I ever slipped. This was the first time she'd ever asked me, and unfortunately, I had bad news. See, I had just acted out a couple days earlier and hadn't got around to telling her yet. And so the one time up to that point that she had asked me, and I had bad news for her. And she said, well, the saddest thing about it was that, you're basically, according to the Bible, committing adultery when you do this. Now, up until that time, I had deceived myself that, well, when it was only masturbation, well, it's only hurting me. And then when it was only pornography, well, they're not real people. So that really burst my bubble. Because I had always said, well, at least I'm not an adulterer. And I never wanted to hear those words from my wife again. I never wanted to see that look on her face again. So I got into a group, I got connected, and I started working on a program. And so as a result, the kind of freedom that I've been walking in now, 4.5 years later, is so different than before. I'm not under that bondage anymore. And I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that I'm perfect. I still have my slips. But the thing is the grace that I have now is so overwhelming when those slips happen. And being able to get back on track is so much easier. And the periods of integrity are so much longer. So, God is faithful, and I'm still in accountability to this day. I don't pretend for a minute that I couldn't go back to those old ways of bondage. What was so transforming for me was that I started getting plugged in a group on a week in, week out basis, and I started putting my life in the light and my cards on the table. I had also had some therapy, which was extremely helpful, and so I was able to bank on that. And so those two things were the main components. Plus, I started getting involved in things like the 12 steps and putting my life in the light in contrast to what those principles were teaching, learning from those. Of course, I was grounded in God's Word. I started doing some personal growth work as well, and just looking at, the ways I was doing life and how I really was not living up to my potential. I wasn't taking risks. I wasn't pursuing God's redemptive vision for my life. I was trying to live a small, safe life, and as a result, it was boring. So who wouldn't want to act out? For a lot of us, acting out is the only fun, the only adventure, and even the only exercise that we got in our addiction. So for me, I had to start taking care of myself. I got involved in running, and so my wife and I are runners. We run marathons, half marathons, and things like that. That's a thrill and a challenge, and it's good for you. Eating right, doing things like having adventurous fun. I love to travel. I love to go and do things that are outside the box, like skiing. And so it's a lot about self-care, but it was really initially about getting involved in other men's lives, letting them see into mine, and being accountable to them truly by letting them know every single week when was the last time I had crossed any of my integrity boundaries. God says, attempt things so big that unless I'm part of them, they're doomed to fail. So that's what I've tried to do. He also says, in your weaknesses, my strength will be made perfect. So I try to let Him use my past to redeem my future. And so with our ministry, Healing for the Soul, counseling and coaching, we have been able to help a lot of people. And that's my heartbeat, is to do counseling with people who are sexually broken, to help people who don't have any hope, to give them help by showing them my message, not just that I'm a person who does this clinically, but that I've walked this road personally. So that's a big heartbeat of mine. Obviously, God uses our hindsight, to give us insight, and develop foresight. And that's what I'm really trying to be about in my life. God can heal anyone from anything indeed. And I mean, that's not just a slogan that we use for pure passion. That's the truth. I mean, He is the Redeemer. God died on the cross in the man Jesus Christ. And in doing so, He had the weight of sin of the whole world on His back. So nobody's suffered more than Him. I mean, when you've got the cumulative suffering of man on your back, that's every form of sin and brokenness right there.